Welcome to Contemplative Citizenship, our opportunity through the Urban Well and St. James in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to find those spiritual resources and practices for contemplation that strengthen us in mind, body, and spirit, enabling us to find our inner stability and core needed in and with God and ourselves so that we can live faithfully and wholeheartedly in the world on this day and each that is to come. I am Stacy Carpenter, one of the clergy at the Urban Well in St. James, and with my colleague David Peck and other voices and conversations, we are developing this theme of what it means to be a contemplative citizen in a time when we as a country and around the world are facing deep division, distrust, distraction, disorientation, and disorder at levels we have not seen for decades, maybe for some of us in our lifetime. It's good to be with you today. I am Stacy, one of the clergy at St. James in the Urban Well, joined by Dr. Dennis Downey, Professor Emeritus from Millersville University here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Dennis was a professor of American history, social history, and the history of ideas, and is also a disability advocate. Dennis, welcome.
Good morning.
So good to be with you today.
And with you, Mother Stacy.
As we do each time in our contemplative citizenship podcasts, let's take a moment to get ourselves grounded. If you are sitting in a chair, feel your feet on the floor. Maybe sit up a little straighter and connect with your breath. If you're out walking, listening to us, maybe slow your pace down a bit. Maybe even stop and take a look around. Take in the beauty of your surroundings. And I'll invite us into 60 seconds of silence. Welcome back. Well, Dennis, very excited to have you here today. We're continuing our discussion on the cardinal Christian virtues, and today you are going to talk with us about the nature and virtue of justice. So the first question I have for you is, as you think about the nature and virtue of justice, what are some maybe scriptures or holy readings that come to mind for you?
Well, as I shared with the Contemplative Citizenship group last night, Psalm 9, verses 8 through 11 hold a particular meaning to me, as do a number of other quotes and statements that are scripturally based but apply to our human condition. And would you like me to read Psalm 9?
I would. I'd like to say I have them all memorized, and I'm not there yet.
Well, this is Psalm 9. It's verse 8 through 11. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has set his throne for judgment. He judges the world with justice. He governs the people with equity. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of distress. They trust in you who cherish your name, for you forsake not those who seek you, O Lord.
Beautiful. And what is it about this psalm and the words of this psalm that draw you into this idea of judgment and justice?
Well, I think that what really appeals to me in this particular psalm is the notion that God rules the world with justice. And no qualifications, no limitations on that. And he governs his people with equity, with fairness, and with respect for their dignity, I would say. And that for the oppressed and for the distressed, God is a nurturing presence who walks with us and understands us, and he forsakes us not.
And he forsakes us not. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And then I believe you also said that there's a verse from Amos that speaks to you.
Yes, this is a very brief one, and it's influenced a variety of religious and social figures in our own contemporary times. Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream.
Gosh, what an image that brings to mind.
Yeah, it's great imagery, and this connection between justice and righteousness just stands out to me.
So what is justice? What does it mean? What does it mean to be just? What does it mean to do justice? How do we understand justice in 2025, and maybe how has justice been understood over time? And, love to hear from you on that.
Well, I'd say that justice has a variety of different meanings depending upon the context and the setting. Justice can be scripturally based, legally based. It has political, it also has social meaning. And so depending upon how the word and how the virtue is understood, it takes on different characteristics. If you want to be technical about it, justice can be procedural. Anybody who watches Law and Order gets a heavy dose of that.
Sure do.
It can be what's called distributive. Who gets what, and what is their due? Justice can also be retributive. That means that justice has an element of punishment behind it. And finally, and what appeals or interests me most, is the idea of restorative justice, repairing relationships to their rightness.
And this goes back to, for those of you who are listening now, and maybe you didn't catch last week's episode about prudence, which is the mother of all of the cardinal virtues, because prudence leads us into wise discernment and allows us to participate in the other cardinal virtues in a way that brings out their most compassionate, generative, generous, grace-filled qualities. And so hearing you talk about restorative justice, repairing relationships to rightness, I'm really interested to hear in that.
Well, and, I think that the phrase itself is long-standing, the notion of restorative justice, that justice involves the process and the effort to repair or to restore broken relationships. And as I said last night, the Jewish theologian Martin Buber talked about I and thou, and that seemed to capture it with me. That faith, that justice is relational. The relationship between I and thou, a person and God. But also it is relational to each other, how we treat and respect each other. And sometimes relationships get broken. Sometimes we doubt, or we're uncertain, or we reject. And similarly in society, we are at odds with each other. The concept of restorative justice and justice in general means that it has an element of fairness and dignity and right purpose behind it. So whether it's restoring our relationship with God, and here's where contemplative citizenship certainly fits in, or our relationship with each other in a broken world. This notion of restorative justice has had a powerful influence in the United States. It was often talked about by Martin Luther King and the civil rights leaders in South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation movement, in Australia, most recently in Canada, these Truth and Justice Commissions trying to get at abuses or scandals and to restore or repair relationships to their sense of rightness. And so in that sense, you see the scriptural or the spiritual and the social coming together, just as our ongoing discussion of contemplation and action come together. They complement each other.
I thank you. I really appreciate that reflection. And I think going back to how you described how justice can be experienced, it can be procedural, distributive, retributive, say that word five times fast, or restorative, that what I'm hearing you say is that as people of faith who are being guided by these values and these virtues as we think about justice from a faith perspective, that where it most lies is in this idea of restorative, because this is talking about repairing relationships to rightness, firstly with God, then with myself, and then out in the world with others.
Precisely.
Great.
And I think that is an aim of the contemplative citizenship program, is to go deep and try to understand how that relates to our everyday experiences, not only in terms of a faith journey, but in our relationship with the world around us. What does it mean to be in the world and to be just, or to do justice? And restorative justice, I think, is the key to so much of that.
Excellent. Really appreciate those reflections. I believe Bonhoeffer had also had some words about justice, didn't he?
He did.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Surely. And for folks who may not know the name, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor and activist, a theologian, who came to the conclusion that justice costs. And he drew a distinction between the idea of cheap grace and costly grace. And you find this most usually, folks will see this when they read The Cost of Discipleship, his great book. And for Bonhoeffer, who was a deeply spiritual person, but also cared about the world around him, and particularly the atrocities of Nazi Germany, it led him to the conclusion to put his faith in action, not just to preach about justice, but to do justice. And in the end, it cost him his life.
And that idea of like moving from this contemplation into action, it sounds like in his book, Cost of Discipleship, you see Bonhoeffer making that journey?
Very much. And in fact, one of the participants last night picked up on my comment about reinventing Bonhoeffer's wording to fit our topic of justice and cheap grace and costly grace. And she had some very eloquent things to say about Bonhoeffer and how it informed her sense of what it means to be a contemplative citizen, her sense of how one should be in the world, which is also what Bonhoeffer struggled with.
And then you fast forward, a couple of decades later, and here comes Martin Luther King Jr., and he had some things to say about justice, didn't he?
He had quite a lot to say about it, and there are any number of very famous quotes, one of which is that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. Well, that's our hope, and sometimes we thirst for evidence of that. But more particularly, and this is a quote that has deeply shaped my own sensibilities since I read it in high school. This comes from his letter from Birmingham jail, written on Good Friday in 1963, after he was imprisoned for civil rights protests. And Dr. King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And in just preparing for my little presentation last evening, I really paused and reflected on this notion of an inescapable network of mutuality. And several weeks ago, I talked about Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, and his expression, exquisite mutuality. We are bound in relationship to each other. And the call and the commandment is to do justice. So it really resonated with me. Not just Bonhoeffer and King, but also Greg Boyle's phrase of just a year ago in his book.
The theme from 5,000 years ago continues to be echoed and reflected through the voices of today.
Yes. And if I could say, in thinking about this more overnight, I came to the realization that there was another person that deserved mention in this, not only because he was a deeply spiritual person, but he was committed to doing the word.
Who's that?
This was Cesar Chavez, the leader of the United Farm Workers Movement. And Cesar Chavez wrote, and I think it's quite a good summation of what we're talking about. He said, "It is possible to become discouraged about the injustice we see everywhere. But God did not promise us the world would be humane or just. He gives us the gift of life and allows us to choose the way we will use our limited time on earth. It is an awesome opportunity."
Wow. Would you say that quote one more time?
Sure. And this is someone who struggled for justice. It is possible to become discouraged about the injustice we see everywhere. But God did not promise us that the world would be humane or just. He gives us the gift of life and allows us to choose the way we will use our limited time on earth. It is an awesome opportunity.
Mm.
When I was in college, there was a Jesuit priest who said to me, "Your mistake is you think life is fair. Life is not always fair, but it demands courage." And that's what drew me to this quote. Justice, being there for others, to do right, to be fair, to be loving and faithful, sometimes demands courage.
And that takes us back to where we started this part of our series of contemplative citizenship, which is we started with the cardinal virtue of fortitude, which is courage.
Yes.
Well, this has been a wonderful time and opportunity with you, Dennis. I so appreciate what you shared with us about justice. How about we wrap it back around in two ways? One, what would you say to our listeners about the virtue of justice and the relationship between contemplation and action?
Well, and that's the essence there. And I think for me, no one said it more clearly than Alan Paton, who was the author, a South African educator and religious figure and a anti-apartheid leader. He wrote a prayer, and I recited the prayer last night, and I think this captures it all. Alan Paton wrote, "O Lord, open my eyes that I may see the needs of others. Open my ears that I may hear their cries. Open my heart so that they need not be without succor. Let me not be afraid to defend the weak, because of the anger of the strong, nor afraid to defend the poor because of the anger of the rich. Show me where love and hope and faith are needed, and use me to bring them to those places. And so open my eyes and ears that I may this coming day be able to do some work for peace for thee." Contemplation and action, the spiritual and the social, all seem to find their place in that brief prayer that Alan Paton wrote decades ago.
Yeah. And so contemplation gives us the opportunity to remember, firstly, lastly, and everything in between, which is the one relationship in which we are to align ourselves in right relationship is with God. So that when we go out into the world to do that action, we can do so from a place that is aligned and in concert with the will of God, which is for grace and mercy and love, through which justice can shine.
It's beautifully said, and it echoes what someone said last night, sharing his own personal reflection on all of this, that contemplation is needed so that we don't become the thing we hate. And there's a wisdom in that, and it's a wisdom born of experience.
Yes.
And if not us, then who?
This has been such, as always, because this is not the first time you've been with us in this Contemplative Citizenship series. Always wonderful to spend time with you, Dennis. So appreciate how you pulled together what justice is, how we understand it, and what it means to want to live into this virtue and take it out into the world as a person of faith who grounds their life in contemplation and action. Look forward to the next time that we can gather together.
Thank you, Mother Stacy. It's always a privilege.
Thank you. I look forward to connecting more and more with you. Like, subscribe, or follow Contemplative Citizenship through our website, stjameslancaster.org, or at theurbanwell.org, on YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, peace be with you.